The Top Floor Please podcast, where women in leadership rise together. I'm your host, Melissa McCormick, executive coach and founder of the Grace and Salt Leadership Academy. This is your space to find clarity, grow in confidence, and lead with bold authenticity. Whether you're navigating the boardroom, building your team, or stepping into new territory, you're not alone. Let's talk real challenges, real growth, and real leadership because the top floor isn't just a place, it's a mindset. Alrighty then, let's get started.
Question. Have you ever left a meeting thinking this? Have you ever thought, you know what? I said the exact same thing. No, maybe I didn't say it word for word, but close enough. I know it was similar. I shared an idea. I offered a recommendation. I shared a concern, whatever it was, and nothing. Crickets. The conversation moved on. There was no discussion, no excitement, no action, no nothing. It was like you didn't even speak. And then a few minutes later, somebody else says something remarkably similar to what you had said. And suddenly people are nodding, questions are being asked, decisions are being made, like the room is engaged. And you're sitting there wondering, what just happened? Why did they listen to him and not to me? Was my idea bad? Was I speaking English? Did I explain it poorly? Am I invisible? Is this politics? Is it a bias? Today, we're talking about one of the most frustrating experiences executive leaders face, when your ideas don't seem to gain traction. And the answer may surprise you, because often the issue isn't the quality of the idea, it's the way influence is established before the idea is ever spoken. Welcome to the Top Floor Please podcast. This is the podcast for leaders who are ready to stop drowning in the day-to-day. You want to get out of the weeds and you want to start leading with greater clarity, confidence, and strategic influence. Hi, I'm Melissa McCormick. I am your host of the Top Floor Please podcast. I once planned to argue cases in a courtroom, but I decided to trade that courtroom for the boardroom so overwhelmed business owners and leaders can get out of the weeds, communicate clearly, strengthen their teams, and get their time back doing what they should be doing. All right, so here is today's kind of memory dart. What I want you to really remember today is that influence isn't measured by what you say, it's measured by what happens after you say it. All right, so let's talk about why. I've coached enough leaders to know this experience is almost universal. You leave the meeting replaying the conversation in your head. You raised the issue. You mentioned the opportunity. You shared the concern. Then somebody else gets all the energy and gets all the traction. And if we're being honest, it feels personal. I remember so many times where I would have the guts, right? Because I didn't really feel comfortable speaking up. So I would do this. I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to speak up. And I would. And then there was crickets. And I really thought it was me. We naturally assume they didn't value my idea. It was stupid. Why did I speak up? And what that does is then that conditions you the next time to not speak up. But many times, that's not what happened. The idea wasn't rejected. The room simply wasn't influenced. And those are two very different things. One of the biggest mistakes leaders make is assuming that influence begins when they start speaking. And in reality, influence often begins long before the meeting starts. This was one of the biggest lessons I learned during my executive career. And here, many leaders believe if my idea is good enough, then people will support it. And that does sound super logical, except executive leadership doesn't work that way. Organizations are filled with good ideas. What leaders are evaluating isn't just the idea. They're evaluating risk, credibility, timing. Maybe they're evaluating business impact, strategic alignment, trust. Sometimes the person delivering the message influences how the message is received. Not always fair, but it is reality. The leaders who gain influence understand this. They don't just focus on having good ideas. They focus on helping others understand why those ideas matter. This is especially common among high achieving women. Many women become successful because they are exceptionally good at their jobs. They're prepared, they're knowledgeable, they're reliable, they're detailed, right? They know the data, they know the facts, they know the business. Those qualities absolutely matter, but eventually a shift happens. You move from being rewarded for expertise to being evaluated on influence. And that's where many leaders get stuck because expertise answers this. What happened? Influence answers, what should we do about it? Those are not the same conversation. Okay, let me say that again. Expertise, like you've got all of the knowledge and nobody is arguing that piece, right? Big expertise answers this question. So what happened? But influence says, what should we do about it? That's the distinction. Here, let's look at an example. So there's a leader who says, customer complaints increased by 18%. Information. Another leader says, customer complaints increased by 18%, which creates a retention risk. I recommend we address the onboarding process before it impacts revenue. That's influence. You notice the difference, right? The one leader says customer complaints increased by 18%. Excellent, they did. But then the other leader said, well, that creates a retention risk. I recommend we address the onboarding process before it impacts revenue. That is the difference. The first statement informs. Absolutely correct, 18%. The data shows all that. No one's going to argue that. But the second statement directs attention. One reports it, one leads. Executive leaders don't just bring data, they bring perspective. And perspective is what moves conversations. Make sense? Okay. So now I just want to, address the elephant in the room. Sometimes there absolutely are biases, no doubt. Sometimes politics exist. You're right. And sometimes personality influence outcome. Of course. Those realities, I'm not ignoring them at all, but I've also watched many capable leaders give away influence unintentionally. They present information, then stop. They share observations, then they wait. They assume others will connect the dots. Meanwhile, someone else walks in the room and says, well, here's what this means. Here's what's at risk. Here's what I recommend. And guess who gets remembered? The person who provided direction, not just information. Okay. So I want you to really think about that. How are you showing up in those discussions? Are you showing up with strictly information or a presentation, or are you actually showing up with, well, this is what, if I own this company, this is what I think we should do. This is the direction based on my expertise and my knowledge and my influence, or what I know, this is the direction we need to go. So you're influencing those in the room. So think about, how are you showing up? How are you participating? How are you sharing this information and presenting this information? One of the things that I observed repeatedly in executive leadership was the most influential people in the room were rarely the people talking the most, right? In fact, many were surprisingly concise, but they consistently did three things. One, they connected information to business outcomes. Two, they framed issues strategically. And three, they made recommendations. Okay, so write this down. One, they connected information to business outcomes. That is critical. They framed issues strategically, and they made recommendations. Honestly, the higher you get up in the organization, those folks that are at the top, they're expecting you to come with recommendations. They don't want to think this hard. They got they're responsible for hundreds of people and their families. They really pay you to be thinking about all of this stuff and what should we do about it. They helped the room make sense of complexity. So, I don't even know how this happened, but I was pretty good at that, in fact, I do it today. We've got a big problem on our hands, and I can discern what I can just kind of drill right down into it. right? A complex solution or complex problem, I can come up with a very simple or directed, not necessarily simple, but directed solution. And once I saw that pattern, it changed how I communicated. Instead of asking, what information should I share? I started asking, what decision am I trying to influence? Like, what would be really, really important to the people in the room about this information? How does it align with our strategic plan and where we're going? How does it align with how we want to serve this customer? Is it good news? Is it bad news? Whatever it might be, I'm not spinning it. I'm just taking whatever information it is and I'm connecting the dots so somebody else doesn't have to. That's a completely different mindset. And it's one of the shifts that separates managers from executives. Okay, so I want you to write this down. There are 3 ways to increase your influence immediately. I want you to lead with why it matters. Don't make people work to understand significance. Tell them. Instead of our turnover increased, I want you to say our turnover increased, which creates both operational and financial risk. I want you to lead with the impact. Don't wait for them to ask the question. Number 2, I want you to bring a recommendation. Never stop at the problem. Move to the solution. Ask yourself, what do I think should happen next? And then say it. Executive leaders are expected to have a point of view. You could be wrong. Somebody might disagree with you, but they're going to respect you that you actually said it and that you thought it through. And number 3, I want you to connect it to the enterprise. I want you to move beyond your function. I talk about this all the time. Enterprise thinking, right? Enterprise thinking. Move beyond your silo or your function. Don't explain how it affects your department. Explain how it affects the organization. The broader your perspective, the more executive your voice becomes. Does that make sense? The next time you're preparing for a leadership meeting, I want you to ask yourself this. Am I planning to share information or am I planning to shape a decision? Those are very different objectives. Leaders who gain influence aren't necessarily the ones with the best ideas. They're often the ones who help others understand why the idea matters or why now matters or what should happen next. Now, please don't misunderstand. You may not, like the leader, your boss may just say, I get it. I understand what you're saying, but we're going to go in this other direction. Okay, fine. But at least you led with more of an enterprise thought process versus tactical and silo or function, self-functioned, right? You're focusing on your own, what's impact for you personally or for your department and not for the overall organization. So I've got 3 takeaways today. One is good ideas don't automatically create influence. Influence must be built intentionally. Okay. So I want you to think about that. Influence must be built intentionally. So as you exercise this muscle, because that's what it is, of bringing solutions, right? What the 3 things that we talked about, those 3 questions that you wrote down. And if you didn't, I want you to rewind here so you can write those down. But influence must be built intentionally. So the first key takeaway is good ideas don't automatically create influence. The second key takeaway is executive leaders move beyond reporting information and they begin shaping decisions. Okay, so we're going to move beyond that reporting information and we're going to start shaping the decisions of the what's next. Okay, so we have 18% turnover rate, which means what to the organization? And third, the most influential voices help people understand why something matters and what should happen next. So before we wrap up today, I want you to take one idea from this episode and I want you to ask yourself, when I speak in leadership meetings, am I sharing information or am I shaping decisions? So think about it, write that down. When I speak in leadership meetings, am I sharing information or am I shaping decisions? And if you're sharing information, then I want you to go to the next level that says, okay, well, how can I shape decisions? If I have some information, I want you to think about it before you go to your boss. think about it. Now, if you don't really know how to do that, I still want you to think about it. I still want you to go, what's next? What does this mean? Why do I care? Why should they care about 18% turnover? Why do we care? And then I want you to go to your boss and say, okay, this is the data that I have. And I believe this is what it means. And I believe this is what we're the direction we should go. What do you think? Come with it. It's okay to have that conversation. In fact, they're going to appreciate it because they don't have to start from scratch. You're already bringing it to them. And then you're learning from them. You're learning when they say, well, yeah, you're on the right track, but I would add this, or I don't know, or yeah, great idea. Start having that conversation with your boss or with a leader in the organization. Having a seat at the table is important. Yes, it is. But influence is what allows you to shape what happens at that table. Influence allows you to shape what happens at that table, but also what others perceive of you, so that then they see you as the executive that you are or you will become. Leaders who advance aren't always the ones with the best ideas. They're often the ones who help others see why those ideas matter, right? So here, I work with leaders who are buried in the day-to-day, right? I help them simplify things. I help them get out of the weeds, start running the business instead of the business running them. That sounds like where you are. You can learn more about working with me at graceandsaltleadership.com. If you are interested at all in my new coaching program, that is the Executive Accelerator program, please reach out to me. I would love to give you those details and see if it's a fit for both of us. If this episode resonated with you at all, I would love it if you would share it with another leader who may need to hear it, right? Get them into the Top Floor Please podcast world. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss what's next. All right, everyone. Until next time, keep leading forward.
Thanks so much for hanging out on the top floor. If today's episode gave you something to think about or a little boost, share it with your friends to keep the momentum going. And hey, if you're ready to rise, find your voice, and lead with clarity and confidence, we'd love to connect with you. Reach out at graceandsaltleadership.com to learn how Grace and Salt can support your growth. Remember, you don't have to lead like everyone else, just lead like you. All right, I'll see you next time on the top floor.